And you're based in, your practice is based in both Perth and Melbourne. How do the different places inform the work? I mean, because they're pretty different cities.
Yeah, but we're pretty similar people. So I suppose the idea is that there's a sort of level of criticality that we're able to read into both situations, and you know, we understand Perth because the three of us, Finn Peterson and Adrian Iredale and myself, grew up there. And went to suburban high schools and went to Curtin together and graduated together, and you know, then sort of buggered off for 10 years and then kind of came back and started the practice. But I think that there's really a way in which, as West Australians, we still read Melbourne in quite a naive manner, and tend not to get bogged down with a lot of the kind of cultural construct that goes on in the city, and I think that gives us a kind of level of opportunity, but also a level of approaching it almost naively. Now, you know, I've been here for 10 years now, so it's a bit difficult for me to claim those things anymore.
Also because you've become quite involved in the world of architecture at a broader level in terms of the media and communication. How has that sort of worked in relationship to practicing and being at RMIT as well?
Well, I mean, I think the way in which my role, let's say as a critic, has come about is very much about being able to look at work which is happening on the East Coast in a kind of, you know, critical and analytical manner. So almost looking at the things that are going on from an outsider's perspective, almost in the early days of Monument. I think that then evolves itself into engaging with a community where you begin to build relationships with people within that community, and over time they then begin to become the people that ring you and say, well, I'm just finishing this building, do you want to come and have a look at it? You know? And I think that the idea of sort of being spread across practice, academia and the media is quite intriguing, as you would sort of certainly know, where you know, people are sometimes a little unwary as to in what capacity are you actually
Which hat are you wearing?
Are you here as practitioner, or are you here as
Yeah.
education hat?
It's an interesting question. Which one ultimately do you see yourself as?
Well, I'd like to remain entirely pluralist myself. Yeah, I mean, I think for as long as I can physically do it, I think it's critical to be able to move across each of those three fields. And you know, if we come back to the Peter Cook role model scenario, I mean, he's done it for the last 50 years. So, you know, potentially I can.
Do you need to be able to do all that stuff to become a successful architect?
No, I think that working in academia and working in the media damages your ability to be a successful architect in a commercial sense, because the amount of time that you need to dedicate to those other activities is certainly time which is removed from your ability to make money designing buildings. I certainly think that there's value in remaining in all three, but I think that it's a kind of lifestyle choice to spread yourself across all three rather than sort of knuckling down and just doing one. Yeah? I think it would be very difficult to be an architectural academic without that engagement with practice. But I don't necessarily think that it would be difficult to be successful as a practitioner without engaging in academia.
I want to talk a bit about your work in relation to the landscape particularly.
Yep.
You've worked obviously in Perth and Melbourne and in the city and out of it. You've done a few projects in Victoria that are on the edges of Melbourne. Do you want to talk a bit about how your practice approaches landscape? Because you've got a relatively oppositional view, to say that, of Glen Murcutt.
Well, I mean, I think that one of the key things, and if you have a look at the website, the website kind of fesses up a few agendas straight up in the way in which it's organised, where the way that we categorise our projects on the website is very much about their distance from the city. So that there's this notion that the architect operating in an urban context is quite different from the architect operating in a remote context.
The work is different, or the way of doing the work is different, or both?
Both, I think. You know? I mean, I think that there are, again, opportunities and constraints that exist in an urban fabric that provoke a particular response. In a rural context, there's, the things that exist about being on the edge of a city begin to kind of then provoke other responses. For example, heritage legislation in an inner urban suburb is probably critical because of overlooking and kind of getting the thing through planning and how does this thing look in the street. Whereas in a rural context, it's basically a free-for-all because the neighbours are a couple of k's away.
As long as it's not reflective.
As long as it's not reflective, or not sitting on top of the hill.
Right.
But I mean, I think that the key issue is the manner in which, as the architect, you're able to assess the landscape condition. Now, be that an urban landscape or be that a remote desert landscape, it's about how you might start to identify the manner in which you should act in that place.
So what is the response then to the open rural landscape? How do you position a building in that landscape? Because that really is often a perception about Australia, that it's about buildings in a landscape.
Well, I mean, I think that we have a desire for permanence, and I think that comes from attempting to ground buildings in landscape so that we take advantage not only from a technical level of the thermal properties, but from a kind of idea that the work has emerged from that landscape and is part of that landscape.
It's literally in it.
Yeah, it's in it. It's not hovering delicately above that landscape. It's if you go into the Australian landscape and you dig some holes, you've made an impact on that landscape. And I suppose our position is, if you're going to dig the hole, then you may as well dig a big one. And that the architecture is then sort of emergent from that landscape. And if you're hovering deliberately. You're hovering in order to capture a view, or you're hovering to allow occupation of the building underneath. You're not just sort of sitting up slightly for no reason whatsoever.